morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be tuning in from. Jason, this is episode 102. They said it couldn't be done, but it's being done.
It's crazy that 102 episodes, we still have new stuff to talk about. I love the fact that our topics keep evolving based on what's new and fresh in the industry. And certainly this week is going to be no exception to that.
Absolutely. And before we really dive in, want to encourage everyone, give a shout out where you may be tuning in from. You can see the world map here. We're lighting up some production staffing. We've got in Texas a couple of people. We've got Jason, some production assistants. I'm in Colorado. Our producer's in Georgia. And we've got somebody else, Jason. Who do we have in the state of Ohio?
From the great state of Ohio, we have Karinne Bessette, easily the smartest person on 365 that I know at Veeam. So happy for you to join us again this week.
Yeah, we had to pull some strings to get Karinne here. We had to beg and ask nicely. We actually offered Karinne just slightly more than we do typically some of our guest contributors here, which is a free beer next time we see you at a live event.
Wait. I paid for that beer last week. We are good on that one, actually.
Karinne, welcome. Thanks so much for joining. Echo what Jason said. You are our go-to person live in stage or on stream when it comes to 365. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks for reaching out and getting me on board. I always love coming on with you guys. You got some great industry insights to add to the 365 conversation I use all the time. I know we're going to be talking about some teasers to those reports that you guys put out, so I'm excited to get in here.
Yeah, let's jump in with that, Jason. You know, we've talked a lot. Anyone's been following some of our streams really all this year and into last year. We've hit a lot of different research. But I thought I would play some of our greatest hits because it tees up nicely some of the 365 conversation that we want to have. If we really think about the first slide, Jason, walk us through this because it's very easy to say, well, I guess the first thing is it's easy to say it's a SaaS-based app. Somebody else is protecting that, meaning the SaaS provider, but that's not necessarily the case. And if someone else is going to protect it, it's not just one role, is it?
It's not. And so one of the things that's been interesting to watch, and Dave, you and I have each been doing this for roughly 30 years of protecting data. It's always been interesting to find out who within an organization actually defines the strategy and the requirements for how backups should be done or if they should be done. And then separate from that, who's actually responsible. And so this first chart, it's interesting to look at when several different personas within, I think it was 1,500 organizations in this particular, this comes from the Cloud Protection Trends Report for 21. By the way, spoiler alert, there will be a Cloud Protection Trends 22. Got just a few months left in the year, so look for some refresh data on that. But in this case, about 600 unbiased organizations, so not Veeam customers, were asked a couple questions. And the first persona question was, who's defining the requirements, right? What needs to be done? And I love the fact that both the SaaS admins, meaning those Microsoft 365 administrators, and the backup admins, they both agree and they have the same lens on really central IT is defining the strategy. Hey, this is corporate data, which means we have to back it up to the same standards that we back up the rest of the corporate data. Right. And so I love the fact that both of them agree. I love the fact that the cloud teams are involved. I actually think it's kind of neat that the data protection team is not third line down. They're not the head of the table on this one. Right. They are affecting the requirements and strategy. But really, I love the fact that M365 data is being considered just another kind of data to be curated by the org.
Yeah, I like that. And I'll make a statement. And Rin, you say if you agree or disagree. The thing that I like about what Jason described, meaning it's not the backup person or the backup role saying or evangelizing for protecting this. I feel like we've been in kind of this evangelical mode. Hey, you need to protect your SaaS-based applications, not because the SaaS provider is unstable, but because there are other capabilities, especially for M365, that you may want to continue to get, meaning if you had on-prem Exchange or on-prem, OneDrive, SharePoint, et cetera, you might be used to a certain level of retention, individual object restoration, reporting, a whole host of other things. Do you buy that thesis that we're making some headway with more in the business, knowing that needing to protect these things?
I would 100% say yes. And especially the last couple of years, we've had a lot of conversations about our biggest competitors, not necessarily other vendors, but the concept that you do need to protect this data. We used
Yeah.
to joke all the time on-prem, oh, where are you storing that backup? Oh, on that same server and the same credentials as, oh, wait. And when we moved to the cloud, we kind of forgot that concept. Now we're starting to realize, and they're actually starting to build compliance and regulations around it in many countries, including here in the United States, about making sure you keep longer retentions of that data. And it's not just a conversation with your IT department, because your IT department generally wants it. It's also your compliance officer seeing how long you need to have it. Not too long, not too little. And we found out a great deal of information, especially from this last report on retention in that length.
Brent, I
Yeah,
love that point of view. Dave and I used to joke, one of the main reasons that snapshots are not backups is because snapshots tend to be on the same storage array as the primary disk. And so when you lose that array, you lose everything. I don't think I had couched it quite that way before, talking about if the only thing you're doing is recycle bin or just dropping it in the same account that you had, it creates that same single point of failure. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, it's a good comment for sure. Let's check out another data point. Jason, now this is from some interesting research as well, asking the very simple question, what are your primary reasons for protecting O365 or M365 data? One of the ways, Karinne, I always like to look at some of our reports about, causality of issues or why might you protect. Before even looking at the data itself, you can glean a lot just from the shape of the graphic. And what I mean by that is on the left-hand side, you don't even have to read all the words, just the fact that there are many different categories. And then you look at the length of the bars, and the bars are just dark green for the SaaS admin, lighter green for the backup admin. But the fact that, Jason, that there's so many different responses, and so many of those responses got votes or ticks from both personas is pretty telling right there, isn't it?
It absolutely is. I love the fact that there's a widespread, right? So there's not just a single hero scenario as long as you solve this, you don't need backup, right?
Yeah.
So I love that. And also the other thing that I really like is the fact that for the most part, both personas agree, right? So, it wasn't that many years ago, like for example, when you ask an Oracle DBA, why do you back up? And then you ask the backup admin the same question. The Oracle DBA doesn't normally care about anything more than about 30, 60, 90 days worth of retention. He just has to be able to undo. And in this case, of course, the backup admin has a much wider set of goals they're looking for. I think the SaaS admin's got it right. I like the fact that they understand accidental deletion, that the recycle bin is not good enough, that there's a lot of different reasons why backup still applies. The Oracle DBAs don't typically get this right. So props to the M365 folks.
Yeah, my takeaway or additional takeaway was exactly what you said, that the alignment of the two constituencies is favorable. I mean, you could be misaligned in unison, but here they've got the quote right kind of answers or concerns. What's the motivation or reason, rationale? But the fact that I think that the SaaS admin themselves is indicating this and is just furthering the notion that we've come a long way, especially M365. And, Karinne, one of the things I always like to point out about M365 backup is I would almost assert unequivocally that the collection of solutions that is M365 is arguably about the only major SaaS application where you could go do something with that data if you had it. Meaning, you don't have a copy of Workday just sitting around on your PC. It might be good to protect the Workday data, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can get back up and using that easily. But, SharePoint, Exchange, OneDrive, Teams, you have local copies of that. All the more reason while protecting that might be really important. And towards that end, I want to, Karinne, throw it over to you. We're going to drift, and I'll apologize in advance, slight Veeam commercial, but I think it's generally applicable, Jason, even if you're not using a Veeam solution, why you should consider backing up Microsoft 365. So we've got 7 different reasons. Do you want to take us through this, Karinne?
Yeah, let's just go ahead and build it out here on the screen and take a look. And you'll start to notice a trend from that previous slide where we gathered all of that great data. That's what led to us creating originally what was called the 6 reasons. And then we started to come into this new facet of Teams conversations. Really what we're here to talk about today is all the changes that are coming to Teams. But I find it interesting that we talk how maybe the Oracle administrator doesn't always get it right, but we forget how many applications and the application sprawl that you're actually taking on as an administrator when it comes to being the Microsoft 365 SaaS. You would never expect someone on-prem to generally manage that many applications, and that's where we get the accidental deletion because we don't know where to find it. The confusion between those retention policies and the different administrative centers. We sort of covered how we've lost the concept of the same access domain for the internal and external credentials, which could be just as detrimental to your infrastructure. And of course, legal and compliance is catching up in this conversation. If you're still trying to move from that on-premises environment up to the cloud, I know hundreds of people trying to come out there for migration utilities because it's not an easy process. And it's been evolving and changing from different types of environments. But last but not least is actually around the team structure, which we're going to dive into and what we're really excited to announce, which is about that Teams Export API. And it's going to help us dive into those complex structures for Teams. Teams isn't just that self-contained application. It's all of these back-end data applications we've been trying to keep track of and just put it out there to the user so they're abusing it and using it more often for us to have to then go protect it for them.
Awesome. And speaking of many reasons, we've got many geographies. How do you like that transition, Jason? 102 EPs. This is what we've learned. Smooth transitions. Let's hit the global map. Canada. Oh, Canada is in the house. I'd like to see, wow, we've got more United States as well, meaning Connecticut, California, Louisiana, which it's kind of a new one, J-Buff, I believe.
Nice.
Pennsylvania, I think, is a little new. We haven't had them in a while. Obviously, you see Canada. Argentina and Peru. This weekend, I was just looking at travel for Veeam in Latin America in Bogota, Colombia, and Mexico City. So very, very thankful for all of that. So we'll come back to that. But Jason, I think you had a question as well for Karinne.
I did. If we could kind of go back one slide, looking at, again, the drivers of why the SaaS admins and the backup admins, why are they doing backups? I was actually surprised that, first of all, I love the fact that in the number one slot, that accidental deletion, right? So I think for too many organizations, the presumption that recycle bin is good enough. And Ren, I like your example about, having a single point of control. But I'm noticing that, and my screen's a little bit blurry, but it looks like the second and third options, one of them, number 2 is related to cybersecurity. Number 3 is related to malicious encounters. I think there's some folks out there that assume that that all of that protection is always built in to M365 as a platform. And I know it's an option, but I think a lot of folks assume that. I know that's also one of your 7 reasons. Can you just kind of double back on that one a little bit before we kind of dig in?
So yes, they do build in some compliance and regulatory things. So let's talk about e-discovery, legal hold. All of these things are meant to provide evidence in a court case. And those are your most locked in data types in order to provide that in a court case, but it doesn't really have restoration capabilities back to your regular environment. So it's not really a restore tool. It's more of a protection legally. Mm-hmm. That being said, they do have a few things, like they have the first and second stage recycling bin. The key is that one credential set being accessed. You can wipe all of those out. I do a lot of testing in my environment. I like to come up with a clean slate to test my new scenario to see what type of data I can restore, can't restore back via native tools and our tools. And I'm telling you, it is really easy once I have an administrative credential to wipe out all traces of that data within my infrastructure. And that's kind of where the breakdown of what's called the shared responsibility model, or the Microsoft shared responsibility model, when it comes to software as a service, they're required to make an access server, give you the possibility to lock down those accounts to access that access server. But any data that is kind of destroyed through the front door is not within their compliance to make sure it's protected. The number one thing when you get hit by ransomware from Microsoft recommendation, check your backups.
Yeah, and I want to re-amplify a question. Our good buddy Rick Vanover, Rickatron, actually jumped in, I believe, on the LinkedIn platform. Ren, we're quadcasting right now, not tricasting anymore. We're on LinkedIn we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, and we're on, what's the other? Oh, YouTube. I don't want to leave them out. So quadcasting. But a question came in from Steve Potter. He said on LinkedIn, hey, do you offer O365 backup for Switzerland? And Rick responded, hey, Steve, I believe so. All public regions worldwide. You could also get a service provider to do it for you. Jason, riff a little bit on service provider. And what I mean by that is an organization could go and consume the Veeam offering, implement it themselves, or what else could they do?
So I love the fact that so many organizations leverage Veeam technologies through our Veeam cloud service provider, our VCSP network, tens of thousands of partners. And the thing that I think is interesting is, look, either way, you have the ability to have your data in either the same cloud or a different cloud than Microsoft, right? But if you're just running Veeam backup for 365 and you're running it yourself, you're probably running it in an instance of Azure, or you're bringing it back on home. I think you've actually got an architecture slide to show some options there. But in either case, you're the person watching, right? You're the person monitoring that. And my favorite part about the VCSP ecosystem is you have dedicated backup professionals 7/24 watching your backups for you, using those same technologies, just a different consumption model economically, and arguably with a higher layer of expertise that's purpose built around backup along the way. Now, Dave, we actually do have a slide for that, right? Around what the whose job is it to actually do backups? I forget if that's part of this or just part of the white paper that goes along with it.
Yeah, quick commercial for our white paper. We do have a whole dedicated research on this that you can download that does also have actual persona breakouts. But I want to give a shout out before, in fact, I'll just click over to our architecture slide really quickly. But shout out Tim Smith. So it says legal teams love it when you can provide a point-in-time copy of the mailboxes for them. So, backup isn't always used just for backup, Jason, right? We're ingesting the data, keeping a copy of it that we can use for multiple reasons. One of those reasons may not be availability. It may be discovery.
Yeah, and Tim's point is spot on, especially when you think about, if legal's driving this, there's only two ways to accomplish that. Either using a third-party product like Veeam to actually say, okay, this is what the mailbox look like as of point X, or you get to unwind and export a legal hold. And I promise it ain't near as pretty as doing a backup solution.
Yeah, it's like needle versus haystack. Needle versus haystack is what I would say. So a little bit on the architecture. And, Karinne, I'll let you guide me if you want me to build this out fully or kind of do progressive revelation without like nerding down too hard. I think it's interesting just to see how is this actually deployed? What does it interface with?
So this is just talking about our entire infrastructure, and we will go step by step because I don't have a pointer to point to each of the sections, and it'll start to get a little muddled. Usually I like to build it out and use like a laser pointer, but we'll work through it. So the first concept, if you're not even familiar with our product, we have Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365. We not only protect the cloud entity, but hybrid entities and multi-organizations can all be added into the same console. From here, we then follow the Veeam traditional into the agnostic way to store your data. Whether you want to work on your on-premises environment, you want to go with a cloud provider for just the object storage, Wasabi is a huge one out there. You can do your own in-house S3 storage. You can go with one of the major cloud providers if you feel more comfortable sending it over to Amazon. However you want to implement that to help meet your compliance. And then our last version before this one was adding in that backup copy feature to low-cost object storage. So we talked about all this data that we found that customers needed 3 to 5 years. On average, all organizations need their data for 3 to 5 years, not just certain regulations. And we're able to tier those longer term copies off because it's not really a restore process. It's more about compliance. And we want to make that tier as cheap as possible. Then from here, we took, and this is one of my favorite parts, actually. It's about our recovery explorers. And the fun fact I like to tease about the recovery explorers is they're not new to this product. They were actually built for our flagship product for when we were working with our on-premises administrators and making the product as easy as possible to use with all of that feedback, and took the greatest parts of that to our cloud entities for the restoration back to original locations, new locations, exporting. And you're not just exporting or restoring in just raw data formats. You're restoring in formats that make sense to the data type that you're working with without needing to be that application administrator, which is very critical when you're working with so many different applications in the online environment. If you can use a file explorer, I can almost guarantee you can restore any of this data the way you need it.
Yeah,
So
go ahead,
go ahead,
Jason.
Dave.
Pause.
Yep. This is like, what is it? Carrier sense multiple, collision detection, multiple sense, CDMA. I'm like 25, 30 years beyond that, my networking class. You go ahead, and I'll just hit one point before we get into what's new.
I'm just going to double down the fact that, we all the data shows that it's a shared effort, right? It takes a village to adequately protect and recover M365 like any other major mission critical workload. And so I love the fact that in this case, it could very well be that the backup admin who's responsible for backing up all the on-prem data centers, the other clouds, cloud hosted infrastructure, et cetera, might be the one who's ensuring the backups are occurring, right? So they're doing the backup half of it. And yet you might not actually want the backup admin to go and restore mail messages. You may not want the backup admin to be restoring sites and lists and objects in SharePoint. And so I love the fact that the backup admin can be responsible for the left-hand side of this and ensuring the backups are recurring and that we're storing the data long enough for regulatory compliance mandates. And yet the Exchange expert is still the one managing mailboxes and folders and messages. The SharePoint expert is still the one managing lists and documents, and they're seeing it within a context that makes sense to them and not just point in time, click here. So I love the fact that the two teams can both do what they're most responsible and frankly for what each of them is smartest at. It's one of the things I fell in love with Veeam well before I joined the company, and one of the things I'm still most proud of on how we do it.
Yeah, I don't think that point can be overemphasized, Jason. A tool should enable you, not get in the way of what you're trying to do. It should support the kinds of tasks and activity that you're used to using in your role. And to believe Karinne made the point, if you can use a Windows Explorer, you can use Veeam's Explorers, which is just analogous to what you've been using on the Microsoft desktop, probably practically your whole life now. And you can easily go retrieve individual objects or get what you need done. That's one of the reasons why I like the Veeam interface, because it just looks like the environment that you're used to operating in.
That's right.
So we got a comment here from Steve on LinkedIn, and he says he really likes the look of all of these restoration options, and he wasn't even aware that we could do all of these. And we're missing one of my favorite graphics, actually. We have 45 different ways to restore data, and I'm like, I wish we had this infographic up. So if you're impressed by this, just wait.
Yeah, in fact, we're going to real time this, and because it is live, and we do live stuff.
Well done, Mr. Russell.
45. That's more than 44, Jason. That's 45.
So I have to call out, there's a restoration portal now too, where you can restore data as an end user or a restore operator. So you don't even need access to the backup server itself to restore data or needing extra permissions in the 365 environment, which can help with those compliance conversations.
Yeah, this is crazy if you think about it. I mean, just think about it. And I'm just going to pick on Exchange, right? Because for a lot of folks, for a lot of organizations, even if you don't embrace the entire 365 portfolio, I guarantee the one thing that you're doing is your mailbox is now running in somebody's cloud, right? And just think about the fact that you can pull an individual message, you can pull a folder, you can pull a calendar, right? And that message, you can drop it as a single item. You can drop it in somebody else's mailbox. You can reconstitute the whole mailbox. You can create the attributes in the mailbox, right? And that's just Exchange. Right. And then there's
this is just 365. We have a ton of other products that cover the rest of the infrastructure too. Same look and feel.
Same look and feel. Exactly. And so, what's new in v6a, little terminology, version 6. A is we just increment alphabetically on some of the quote minor capabilities, but some of the minor capabilities, Karinne, are actually kind of a big deal. We thought we'd highlight a couple. I'll just go kind of one by one. This one's a little more, in the plumbing, I'll call it, but it turns out to be a big deal. Tell us about this one.
So this is probably the main reason that we released a minor, quote unquote, minor version. This is the new Teams Export API. This Export API is going to give us more of a metered or protected API experience to the 365 environment to back up and restore data that has all of that good metadata so we can get them back to the original location. We're super excited about this because we're not using those Exchange APIs, the OneDrive APIs, the SharePoint APIs to get the data that is in that front end collaboration interface. So with this, if you haven't already heard, we've done a lot of streams about it. We should be very excited. There is going to be a metering behind it depending on your license level, but it comes with massive improvements in this version as well. So it's not just about the Teams API, and I'm gonna be honest, I didn't actually know we were gonna release this many cool things in this feature. I was scrambling to write these up last minute because I was excited. I was not sure they were going to get released. And it's not just minor improvements. Do we have a screenshot of all of those speed improvements for backup and data compression to the object storage?
Oh, Karinne Bessette, you know we do. Here we go.
So we didn't release just a couple. And it's not just about the backup speed. It's about the compression rate. We now get 3 times better compression rate to object storage and 3 times faster data transfer from your backup to your backup copy. So that alone is impressive. Not to mention, this is a metered API coming, but we're giving you 3 times lower egress costs during the backup copy. So we're able to incorporate all of these space savings and work around this continuous problem that we were having before of throttled infrastructure and optimizing our product to make it better. There's very little reason that I found anymore that we really need to go in and use these auxiliary backup accounts. And those are actually being deprecated as well by Microsoft. They're no longer the number one thing they're telling backup providers. And if you're using, I know we're going through this whole conversation originally, if you're not using backup auxiliary accounts, you're legacy software. Now, if you're using backup auxiliary accounts, you're trying to solve a problem and a band-aid that you shouldn't be doing anymore. You should be working with Microsoft's new compliance team and with their backend to get these speed efficiencies.
Outstanding. And as we start to wind down, there's just a couple other areas I want to touch on. One seems perhaps slightly minor, but it's kind of cool. Tell us about this new user protection report.
So there was some other reports in the software about making sure your data is protected for specific users, but this new user protection report isn't just about the mailbox, and it also displays which users are still protected even when you've deleted them from the infrastructure and they're still in your backup, so you can keep track of that throughout the history. Makes it a lot easier to see.
And that has some connotations for things like long-term compliance when someone has to be managed, right?
Yes. 100%. Prove they are still there. And you, for your sanity, can say they're still there with a report and then go back to when they last had the backup and show they are still there. So it's very important for compliance. And this last one, I am super excited about. We are officially certified as backup and restore providers for Microsoft Teams. That means Microsoft went, we like what you're doing. We are working with you and you're working with us to do the things that we say. One of those being around making sure you're using the new export API, which the legacy methods will be deprecated as of October 1st, important date. And you are keeping up with us. Like the deprecation of really needing auxiliary backup accounts is because we're working and we're able to get with those teams.
Nice. Outstanding. Karinne, thank you so much for being with us and taking us through this today. And I want to actually circle back because we had a lot of great chat and commentary that was going on in the LinkedIn comments, and shout out to Rick Vanover and Tim Smith also jumping in there. But Steve had a couple of great comments. It ties into what's coming up this Friday, Karinne and Jason. Steve was asking, and Rick replied, can Veeam also handle other things like Azure, GCP, meaning Google Cloud, my on-prem? Well, as it turns out, Steve and everyone else, Rick and Kirsten are going to do a live demo on our Veeam backup for Azure this Friday on our Tech Bites. Same time that this live stream took place, it'll just be on Friday. So encourage everyone to check that out. So thanks so much for tuning in. Stay safe, stay positive, and we will see you on the next episode.